Ending homelessness and addressing encampments needs to be a top priority for all governments, including my own. Recently, we delivered a positive federal contribution to these efforts. We committed $250 million over 2 years to better address encampments in budget 2024. And I'm here to tell you that we've got deals in place now with almost every province and territory. And in the 2 cases where a provincial deal wasn't reached, we've secured deals with municipalities directly. In Ontario, that means 10 municipalities have agreed to cost match our contributions. And in Saskatchewan, Regina and Saskatoon have made deals with us. This is progress. My community has already seen 1 life lost because of homelessness just this winter. And these federal dollars, that's $96 million for these 12 municipalities directly and $250 million across the country, they are going to make a difference. I also want to be honest though, because our collective efforts are just not at a scale they need to be at. These deals were reached before my time, but the fact that the federal government and Ontario weren't able to deliver a deal together, the fact that Ontario did not cost match that deal, it just isn't good enough. We need to put our politics aside when it comes to a crisis. And seeing our neighbors struggle on our streets, community members denied safe access to our main streets and parks, the growth of homelessness and encampments in communities big and small across this country, it is a crisis. At the federal level, we have made significant progress, and we have also been met with our fair share of failure. First, let's start with the progress. What does it look like? Well, we've increased federal funding to address homelessness by about 400% over the last decade, with a particular increase since the pandemic. That work includes over $550 million each year through Reaching Home. That's our national strategy that includes funding for housing supports, capital investments, client support services, prevention and shelter diversion, and more. It used to have a clear focus on housing first and likely should still. There's also an additional $80 million to address veteran homelessness specifically. All told, between 2019 and 2023, more than 88,000 people have been placed in more stable housing, and more than 150,000 people have been helped with core prevention services. That is not nothing. Those are real lives positively affected. Now, my colleagues in the Liberal Housing Caucus were vocal in calling for action to replace encampments with homes, and our commitment to rapidly build housing that also continues. We have seen several rounds of funding now, a collective $4 billion delivered to rapid housing solutions. And now, today, there's an ongoing effort at CMHC. It's $1 billion over the next 4 years to continue those important efforts. I also mentioned our fair share of failures and the need for honesty. Why? Because despite all of these efforts, everything I've just mentioned, we've been tracking in the wrong direction when it comes to the moving targets of either having chronic homelessness by 2028 or ending it by 2030. In May, the Parliamentary Budget Office concluded that the best available evidence suggests that homelessness has increased in spite of Reaching Home. And as a result, the program is not on track to meet its targets with respect to reducing homelessness. The PVO went on to suggest that just cutting chronic homelessness in half would require an additional $3.5 billion every year. Well, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario has weighed in more recently with a report of its own. It reiterated that encampments and homelessness are on the rise and called for a collective $13 billion commitment over 10 years in Ontario alone. Look, I recognize there are other political pressing priorities. Of course there are. I just want Canadians to know that addressing homelessness is an immediate priority for me. And I will work with any municipality and province to make sure we deliver the right submission in the coming budget, and we work faster, we expedite progress where it's needed with CMHC. Beyond the necessary immediate emergency response efforts to homelessness, and they're important, but it can't be said enough. This cannot be said enough. We know that the solution is housing, housing, housing. Housing first. A shelter bed just does not offer the stability that we all need. And this is where I want to call on Ontario specifically to do more, because we've seen Ontario increase its homelessness support. That is a good thing. It should be recognized. But they have reduced the amount they spend on community housing by roughly the same amount. Effectively, as we have ramped up federal spending on community and social housing, the Ontario government has seen fit to reduce its own commitments in this space, and we have seen an almost 10% decrease, even when the federal funding has been accounted for. As the AMO report highlights, Ontario is the only province where responsibility for social housing has been downloaded to municipalities. It doesn't need to be this way, and frankly, it was not always this way. If you track back to the 1960s, sure, it's a long time ago, but under a progressive conservative government, Ontario created a public housing authority that put policies in place that saw a tenfold increase in social housing investments. Lastly, let's agree that we all deserve clean streets and parks. I've got 2 young kids. I want to make sure our public spaces are open and welcoming for all community members. We've got to make sure that small businesses in our main streets succeed. We can all agree on this without denying people a basic sense of dignity. We don't need to threaten the notwithstanding clause in order to do the right thing. And we shouldn't use people's real vulnerability and real struggle for some shameless partisan end. It was about 2 years ago now. Pierre Poilievre, he stands in front of a video in front of a Vancouver encampment, and he grandstands on the backs of people's real struggles. He others those who just needed a hand up. He has since compared Kelowna to a faraway third world country. This is a city with over 200,000 people and about 200 people who are experiencing homelessness. The city's community safety director called the statement disappointing. And I can tell you, there are some other ways to describe a politician who use vulnerable people as props. Again, encampments in our parks is not an acceptable solution. People living on the street is not an acceptable solution. We live in a wealthy and successful country, and there is no reason we can't deliver the communities we all deserve while ensuring that we're treating people, in many cases, the most vulnerable in our society, with the basic equality of concern, respect, and dignity that they deserve.